Eat the pork, drink the booze, pork, booze, booze. Eat the pork, drink the booze, pork, booze, booze. Eat the pork, drink the booze, pork, booze, booze. Hello and welcome to America's guiltiest podcast, The Pod People. I am Super Saiyan Jigoku, Matisse Van Rossum.
I'm Ben Sheets, and I just came back from hell, and, despite what people say, I really don't think Detroit is that bad.
Damn! Sorry to our listeners in Detroit. Hi, I'm Cleveland Mosier, and it's 9 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah, it's actually 10 o'clock here.
That's right.
So, this week, we are covering a old Japanese film from 1960 called Jigoku, directed and written by Nobuyo Nakagawa and starring Shigeru Amachi, Utako Mitsuya, and Yuichi Numata. And it is the story of a nursing home that goes to hell.
Yeah.
Literally. Cleveland, this was your pick.
Sure was.
I would love to hear your thoughts on Jigoku.
Yes. So I had not seen it before.
None of us have.
Nope. Which is
This
always
is a
fun.
fresh viewing for all of us.
It's usually a favorite of mine. I like it when all of us go in blind. Wow. Yeah. Where to even begin? Probably at the beginning. Our protagonist, Shiro, is in a college class learning about the 9 rings of hell and the various other depictions of hell throughout religion. And his friend, Tamura-kun, drops the exposition on us that the professor is Shiro's girlfriend's father and that he's guilty of some war or crimes during war.
He's got some sins.
He's got some sins he has to pay for. And of course, before that, we're greeted by some incredible intro credits. I don't even know where to begin on those. What a sequence.
There were naked ladies.
There were, with
and,
roses.
I made a crack saying, oh, the Japanese are at it again.
And then, yeah, my defense was like, oh, this isn't, anything that you wouldn't see in a Bond intro. And then, the wailing started. And the weird, sudden jazz, and then back to wailing.
And more naked ladies.
Yeah, and then, machine gun fire, and then, chicken sounds. It's all over the place. The audio to the intro credits is nonsense at times. Generally, the sounds of chaos and suffering, sort of the running theme.
Very hellish. Yeah, we should probably preface this by saying that Jigoku is the Japanese word for hell, so this movie is very hell-centric. As you said, he's learning about various depictions of hell, talking specifically about the Buddhist belief of hell, which is, I think, 8 hells instead of 9. 8 hells of fire and 8 hells of ice. Also worth mentioning, you compared it to a James Bond intro, and this did come out the same year as the very first James Bond film.
Dr. No?
Yeah, came out the same year.
No way.
Yeah.
That's cool.
1960.
Different films.
Yes.
It's so shocking to me that this movie came out in 1960.
Yeah,
it feels
the same
so
year as
ahead
Dr.
of its time.
No. Good Lord.
It feels so ahead of its time in its brutality, in its audacity, in what it shows,
In its
themes
horniness.
and horniness.
Much like Onibaba, I feel like every old Japanese movie we pick always ends up being excruciatingly horny.
Yeah, a lot of violence and repressed feelings. That seems to be a running theme.
The IMDb trivia said that at the time, this was the goriest movie that had ever been made. I'm not sure the validity of that or how you even track such a metric, but I would be inclined to believe it.
Yeah, I'd bite.
Cool if true.
Yeah.
I'd bite. Wow, this film has a lot going for it. So anyway, to get back to the plot, our protagonist Shiro and his, quote, friend, unquote, Tamura.
The most sinister man ever.
Oh my God, after my heart.
I love Tamura.
Tamura is so great.
Every time he shows up somewhere, he's dramatically underlit while everybody else is lit normally. So he just looks so sinister and spooky.
And he's
all
always
the time.
just appearing. He's always just there.
Yeah.
And it's so much
he's
better.
given at 150%.
all the
He
ham
is
and blessing.
overacting.
Yoichi Numata is the
Yes.
actor. He kills it. I love it. It's like Palpatine energy towards the end, even.
My first note that I took for this film is, why is Tamura-kun so spooky? That was about 10 minutes in.
Oh man. So Shiro goes to his girlfriend Yukiko's house, and he's speaking with Yukiko and her family, the professor, and
He's asking their permission to marry her.
yes, Mr. and Miss Yajima. And they are, I think, about to give permission when, who could it be but Tamura appears. And he presents the
Just
father.
inside the house. He
yeah,
just
already
like he's just in there.
Well, I think he said too, it's like, hey guys, I showed up because last time I came by, y'all didn't answer the door and I got real mad. So I'm here now. That's how he framed it. And then like he shows up and he just slides a photo over to the dad, like saying like, I wanted to return this to you. And it's a photo of like two Japanese soldiers struggling, and you don't know what the context is for it. But the professor suddenly looks quite morose and sad.
Maybe it has something to do with his sins, perhaps.
Could be. So they hit the road, Shiro and good old Tamura. They're driving along, and Shiro says, oh, hey, turn here. I have to make a stop. And Tamura's all like, yo, dog, like, that road's not safe. I don't know about that. And he's like, no, it's cool. It'll be fine. They take the road, and a drunk wanders out into the street and leaps in front of Tamura's car, and they kill him. And they keep driving, and Shiro feels extremely guilty about it for the rest of the film.
Yes.
Even though Shiro was the passenger.
many other things. I think that becomes thematic for Shiro, is that he feels insanely guilty about stuff that he did not do.
He is guilt personified, the poor man.
He's guiltier than a Catholic.
Yep, that's right. They drive on, and we see that the drunkard's mother is like there and spies the license plate and vows to take revenge.
Yeah, it turns out that the guy they hit is like the leader of some like Yakuza cell, which I was really hoping would have more payoff than it did.
I kind of love
Yeah.
though that like Tamura like nonchalantly throws this as like, it's just some like Yakuza guy. It's not a big deal, and then it isn't.
Yeah, no, it absolutely isn't. And I was expecting that to be like the whole crux of the film, is like the Yakuza swear their revenge. Well, because the guy they killed, his mother and his wife do swear revenge and say, well, the police won't do anything about it, so we'll hunt these guys down and kill them ourselves. So that was kind of fun.
It was. I enjoyed it. What's the next event to really break down in this film? Oh, first off, it's a wacky film. Us not knowing anything made it great, I think, and I would generally recommend seeing it without knowing much.
I mean, I think the surprise is not in the first half of the movie.
Yeah, this movie is basically two movies.
I would say so. It's very disparate in the way it's structured. Personally, I thought the first half of the movie was a little slow to get started.
I agree.
They had some stunning sequences and shots. Like the one that stands out the most, of course, is the bridge sequence.
Oh yeah,
Which is just shot incredibly. They have these incredible rotating shots where they go upside down.
Reminded me a lot of the shot in Midsummer.
yeah. I would say the style is the best thing about this
Yes.
movie. I love the way it looks all around. Like even the first half, which I would agree with you, Ben. I actually found myself pretty bored for most of the first half. It's shot beautifully.
Yes, it is shot really well.
For some reason, going into this movie, I thought it was black and white. I don't know why. I didn't watch anything on it.
1960.
It is in color, but it's still lit like a noir. It's like a Japanese noir film, kind of. It's super high key lighting, or low key lighting. Sorry. It's like lots of negative dark spaces. Sometimes unmotivated, but I always thought it was good to look at.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, would it surprise you if I told you, Tease, that this movie was Gaspar Noé's favorite film and one of the main movies that influenced him to make films?
No, that would not surprise me.
Right? You see the lineage there, the super bright colors and the very grotesque and dark themes and imagery.
And surreal stuff,
Yes.
very abstract. That's what the second half becomes. Like, this film is split into two halves. The first half is a bunch of people being terrible, and then they all go to hell. The first half is loosely plot driven, I would say, and the second half is more like a sort of abstract Dante-esque descent into hell and witnessing all of the tortures and torments that hell has to offer for all of these different characters. And I thought that was way more interesting than the first half.
Absolutely. And I think the second half actually informs the first half in some interesting ways and makes some of that stuff more interesting. I just wish it was paced a little better.
Yeah, I normally wouldn't mind the slowness if I was interested in any of the characters. And I know that kind of the point is that all of these people are supposed to be sinners or whatever, hence why they all go to hell. But I still felt like there needed to be some kind of
More of a hook.
grounding motive to the characters that made me like relate to them in some way. I guess Shiro is kind of sympathetic, but he's just mad stupid. He's just a fucking idiot.
It was entertaining to see everyone around him die.
Yeah, and
continually.
he puts the guilt for all of the deaths on himself when he was like directly responsible for none of them.
Well, that's
Speaking
his
of,
sin.
we should go into the second death.
Yes.
Which is he's driving with his girlfriend who says without saying that she's pregnant.
Yeah, well, Tamura told him in the scene before, like, oh yeah, you're sleeping with Yukiko. I bet she's even pregnant, huh? And then, yeah, she's...
Wink, wink.
Right, and then the next scene is she's like, I have something to tell you, Shiro. And he's like, no, wait, first I have to tell you that I killed a man last night. Like, Shiro, no, you didn't. You weren't driving. You're the one who wanted to go to the police, and Tamura said no.
Blackmailed him, even.
Blackmailed him, yeah. Like, you're not at fault for this, but he's just racked with guilt. So he wants Yukiko to go to the police with him. She really wants to walk so she can, like, talk to him and tell him that she's pregnant and whatnot. But he insists that they have to get there fast, so they take a cab. And the cab driver crashes for no reason, going 25 miles an hour into a street pole.
Yeah, but like this is post-war Japan, so like that car was probably made out of like melted down Budweiser cans, so pretty rickety car.
Even so, they weren't going fast enough to really hurt anybody, but regardless, the driver was pulped, and Yukiko and her unborn child died as well. And of course,
Now our
Shiro
protagonist-
is racked with guilt.
Even more so.
Double the guilt.
That's right. Double the guilt, double the fun. Now, I have to disagree. I kind of loved the first half, and I felt like the slow burn paired wonderfully with the big finish. I felt like I was watching like the slow sizzle on a dynamite fuse, like just waiting for the big payoff, and boy did we get it. And during like the first act, I think I felt like there were enough balls in the air. I had enough questions, and I was constantly asking myself, is he already in hell? Because there are little signs, the same way as like Jacob's Ladder. The clock is stopped at 9 always. You know, we hear that mentioning of the 8 rings of hell. So, you know, what's going on there? The way that Tamara keeps appearing mystically,
Yes.
like clearly something metaphysical is going on. So that was enough for me. I was having a great time just waiting for Tama to appear again and meeting all these other like weird characters and like seeing how they progress. The stuff with like his dad and mistress and like his mom just in the other room like was pretty fucking insane. And the old painter, like, there's some cool characters.
See,
like,
I felt like there was a lot of potential, but there's no nuance to any of those things. It's like all these characters we meet at this old folks' home are just evil because the film requires sinners to send to hell. There's no nuance to it. Like, there's even the scene where his dad is like the director of the place, and like the doctor is there, and this fisherman brings a bunch of like dead fish that he's just pulled out of the river, and they're all just like, haha, it doesn't matter to us because we're not gonna be eating them. We're just gonna feed them to the old people because better them than us, right? Ha 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 ha. And it's just like so evil without...
Yeah, they're cartoonishly evil. It's fine.
Right, but it wasn't enough to like engage me in what was happening. It's like every new character is just a scumbag or incompetent or both. Even like the Yakuza thing, like with these two women who are trying to like murder Shiro and Tamura for revenge, which is a cool idea. The only thing that comes of that is they also show up to the nursing home because Shiro doesn't think it's weird at all that all of these people that he knows from Tokyo keep showing up to this old folks home in the country because everyone does. But the gangster's wife who he killed is just like on a bridge pointing a gun at him, monologuing about how she fell in love with him the moment she saw him, but then found out that he was the one who killed her husband. So now she's going to have to kill him. And then she trips over nothing and falls to her death off the bridge, which is very funny. I did think that was very funny.
Hey, the dummy like sequence, like,
it's a great shot.
Looks
It was
great.
well shot.
Is a great shot.
Looks
like,
great.
once again, my problem with this movie is not how it looks or how it's shot. I think all of that is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But just like they set up this cool idea that was then just deflated by this woman tripping over nothing and falling off of a bridge. I was just like, okay, I guess.
She's distraught. It's an old bridge.
You know, and I think you make a really good point, Tease, where, like, I think nuance is the key word there, because this movie, the crux of this movie is all about camp and vibrancy, especially in the second half. I was hoping for more melodrama than just evil.
Yeah.
Because then when that turn happens, it's more of an emotional turn than just, oh, these people get what they deserve, come up and...
Because I think there are a few like very melodramatic, like almost soap opera-esque moments, and those parts I did think were fun. That's when I stopped being bored, but they were too few and far between because most of it was just like set up for hell, and I think that half of the movie is too long for setup. If they had condensed all of that to maybe like even the first third of the movie and then had done, because this movie's almost 2 hours long. It's pretty long. So I think they could have cut down that stuff a lot and gotten us to hell sooner, because that's when shit like really gets cool. I'm sorry. I was just so bored in the first half. I wanted to like it more than I did.
Yeah, I was engaged the whole time.
Well, I mean, talk about some of that stuff that you're into. Like,
I mean, okay, so there is something to say for the fact that I'm very visually oriented. I am an artist by trade, so that can often be enough for me. But beyond that, I was just like frequently like searching for symbolism in like the framing, why certain characters were appearing. For instance, the girl who looks mysteriously like Yukiko. Appearing.
Oh, yes.
I was
Sachiko, is that her name?
I believe so.
Yeah, Sachiko.
Sachiko.
Played by the same actress, of course. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when Sachiko appears, that added something else to the mix for me. I was wondering like what's this about now, because she looks just like his dead girlfriend, fiance. All of those little elements had me kind of searching and trying to pick apart what I was looking at and engaged in the film. Trying to unravel the sort of metaphysical mystery that was there.
Do you think those things got like a satisfying enough payoff though? Because it feels
yes
like
and no.
I say that the first half I thought was kind of boring and slow, but maybe that's not like the best way to describe it because I feel like it is busy. It seems like there's a lot of balls that it's juggling a lot in the air. And I think maybe that's why some of the stuff wasn't as impactful for me, because we've got the Yakuza guy who they ran over, and then his mom and wife plotting revenge. That's one plot line we've got. We've got Yukiko dying, and then Sachiko showing up, who looks just like Yukiko. What's going on with that? We've got his mother, Shiro's mother, dying while his father is having an affair with his secretary or whatever. That's a whole other thing. And it just feels like there's all of these little plot lines that are happening at the same time, and none of them ever have a chance to resolve in a way that I felt was really satisfying.
You wanted them to take root.
I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, because I think one or two of those would have been okay. Oh, and there's the cop who wants to marry Sachiko, who we find out is corrupt and took a bribe to frame somebody for a crime who then killed themselves. And it's that gets very little payoff, and there's the people at the old folks home being mistreated. It's take one or two of these things and really develop them before we get into hell, and maybe it would work better. But instead it just felt like so much at once that I couldn't really I couldn't find something to really latch on to that held my interest. What are your thoughts on that?
I think Shiro should be that. I recognize that he's not. He should be the fulcrum that this film operates around. But it is true. His character is not very smart and sort of suffers some of the things that you see even today in anime, where all the characters are all the women are just falling head over heels for him.
Yes.
Even though he really doesn't do anything.
He mopes.
Sort of, he feels a bit like a male insert. But even then, I didn't find him wholly obnoxious. I did still kind of feel for the guy a little bit, because I see it as a good trait, a flaw that a good person can have, to feel so guilty over things that they're really not responsible for.
Sure.
It's poor guy, come on, and hoping and waiting for him to have that realization himself, which he eventually does. At least,
kind of, yeah.
Yeah, he gets a good moment where he gets a shout at Tamura,
yeah.
which is nice. So we do get that payoff as well during the big payoff. So that largely comes around, but it was largely the suspense that helped me. I was patiently and quietly waiting, during any of those sort of busy or slow moments, because the film sets you up for something to go terribly wrong. And there's plenty of setup with the dead fish and the rest. You know that a lot of people are going to die. Something's going to hit the fan at some point. That tension was enough for me. Whether they're cartoon characters or not, there's still about to be a lot of death.
And that
had me excited.
And there is that kind of payoff, but even that sort of culmination where there is all of that death, it felt kind of haphazard to me, and it didn't.
Oh, I liked that about it. It was chaotic.
I mean, it's chaotic, but I mean, I guess narratively haphazard. I wanted there to be some kind of, I don't know, unifying event.
Nah, just when it rains, it pours.
Because
it all goes down at once.
What we have that happens all at once is Shiro's dad's mistress, who has said to Shiro's dad that his son is cute and I'm going to cheat on you with him. She tells him that.
Mm-hmm. But she tells him as a joke.
But he still acts surprised when she inevitably does it. And Shiro's just going along with it, of course. And
I think Shiro was drunk and distraught. I think he was asleep, and he was just covering to try and keep his dad from murdering anyone.
No, I mean, he might have been drunk and distraught, but he was going along with it. She lured him away to the pantry or whatever for some hanky panky. And so when his dad shows up, Shiro says oh, it's all my fault, which once again it was not. It was absolutely the mistress. And so Shiro's dad murders her. Kind of the framing for all of this is that the nursing home is having a 10-year anniversary party that for some reason everybody in the village is going to, because I guess that's what you do when your local nursing home is having a party. You go and eat pork and eat the pork, drink the booze, pork, booze, booze.
all to a really bad marching band.
Oh my, dude, that marching band is hilarious.
I loved
terrible.
it. It was
that
like
was pretty funny.
it was terrible by design and perfectly terrible by design too. Like it gave me like middle school band flashbacks, like hardcore.
Yeah, very, very similar. I'm right there with you. Yeah. Like all of the instruments out of tune, a couple of them like kind of off tempo.
You know what it reminded me of is like an old, like a classic, like an old Tim Burton movie. Like it had that same sort of like feels almost like it's falling apart, you know, sort of vibe, the cartoon melodrama.
But anyway, Shiro's dad murders his mistress while Shiro watches. The Yakuza guy's mom shows up and poisons a bunch of dudes with sake, including the corrupt cop and like the doctor and like the management. It poisons a bunch of people who aren't Shiro. And kills them. All of the other people in the nursing home die from the rancid fish. Sachiko's father hangs himself because we find out that he was having an affair years ago with Shiro's mother, and so she died. And then Yukiko's parents off camera throw themselves in front of a train that we just get in one line of exposition. And it's like, all of these people just die all at once, and and the Yakuza mom strangles Shiro to death. So it's like all of our characters die at once, but there's nothing that like unifies their death other than that it's all at the same time. And like that kind of haphazardness, it was off-putting to me in a way that I didn't
love it
really
because
like.
it's like this inevitable march towards death, and we see that like symbolized later on too, just like all of these bodies just being funneled in towards like nothingness. There's something to be said like about like needing to find an explanation in mass death. There's something like in, you know, that psyche, like sort of deeply ingrained there. Personally, I find it fascinating.
Okay.
I feel like it's one of those things where it's just kind of dated in that, like, if that was made nowadays, we'd be able to add the conception in the film of hell being outside of time, but because they all have to be in hell in the same time, they all have to die at the same time. I feel like it's just one of those things where it happened out of necessity.
Well, how did it work for you, Ben? What did you think about how that sort of the transition, the culmination that then transitions into hell? Did you feel like that?
I thought it was a bit goofy, and like I said, I thought it was a little dated, but it's one of those things where I don't really know if you would need to do it nowadays. But I think overall, seeing all the chaos and death just barraged at you was a really interesting effect, because you see it in succession, just over and over. It really ramps you up to hell itself in an interesting way.
It almost feels like a comedy of errors, but it not quite funny enough. You know what I mean? It's so weirdly circumstantial that if it was a little bit more slapstick, it would be funny.
Well, I think that's sort of what makes it terrifying, for me at least. Like that it's almost funny. It's that subtle twist. Like I think that's sort of the fun of it.
I guess for me it was almost funny enough that I was wanting to laugh at it and couldn't quite get there. So I don't know, I felt kind of blue balled by it, you know? Like I was waiting.
Well, that's a way to feel.
That's just me though, but like let's transition into the second half of the film, which as we mentioned is much more abstract and surreal and right out of the Divine Comedy. Descent through hell and all of the torturous pleasures that it has to offer.
I feel like the second half is where this film really breaks the constraints of the Japanese formalism at the time.
Yes.
Of stuff like Ozu and, I don't know, Kurenku or other ghost stories of the 50s and the 60s of Japan, and really goes past that and becomes very forward-thinking and very ahead of its time in how impressionistic and abstract it gets.
Yeah, almost Bosch-like at times, which is the stuff that I really liked.
I love how vibrant all of the colors are.
I was just over the damn moon by those visuals. There is some extremely cool and successfully implemented compositing shots of like weird hellish skies over like lakes of sulfur and marching corpses, and there's those rings of fire. Like,
oh yeah, those are really cool.
like where the fire is like swirling inward. Like I'd love to know how they designed that. Like I'd love to know. Like they must have like had like an air vent, you know, so that like the flames were being like
creating
pulled
a
in
vortex,
towards the center. Yeah, because it's just like incredible, real, like flaming vortex. And it looks so cool. It's one visual like that after the next. The one thing that sort of has to be forgiven, like if you can get past, is the quick cuts, like the replacement shots. Are
the editing's a little weird, but
yeah.
it's surreal enough that I didn't like.
No, I gave it a quick pass.
Yeah,
like after the first one or two, like it seeps in, and you know you just start taking.
It made it feel more dreamlike for me, honestly.
Oh yeah, I think it's just that a lot of those cuts, like you get the cliche where like the character moves a little bit, so like it's not clean.
The jump cuts,
with those jump cuts. In Hell, it works quite well. They do one earlier on where I don't think it worked as well, where the cab driver is replaced with Tamara.
Yes, I was going to bring that up too.
Before the crash.
Right before the crash, and it feels a little more comical. But once you get to Hell, I think it's jarring and it feels wrong in all the right ways.
Like
sure.
Ben was saying, like the formalism starts to break down and it becomes more abstract. And I think you start to see a lot of like the influence of like early Soviet montage editing stuff come in. Because like there's very little narrative that happens once you get to Hell. Like we see the punishments for all of these shitty characters that we've met, and like Shiro meets Yukiko on the banks of the River of the Dead, and you know she reveals to him that she was pregnant when she died, which we of course all knew, and he's like, "What? You were? Really?" And what I did think was funny is that she's like, yeah, and when I got down here, I didn't think that I could
raise him alone.
Yeah, there was no way that I could raise our child alone, so I put her in a lotus leaf and sent her down the river. So it's like, oh, so you don't think you'd be a good single parent, so you abandon your child in hell. So the rest of it is just kind of like Shiro like running through these like various circles and paths of hell, like trying to get to his baby daughter. But other than that, it's just like one macabre, gory tableau after another.
Well, I kind of love how the exposition is delivered. Like it's so chaotic. Like just in between the screams and the wails, like occasionally Shiro might come across someone and hear something else and learn something new. And like personally, like I just loved that. I think it made for some just incredible sequencing.
I love how the audio will just abruptly cut off too, and it'll go quiet for a second, or you know, give you a short respite in the chaos of wailing and screaming
right before it picks up all over.
Yeah, and it's really unsettling, and when it happens, it almost feels like it gives you a second to ground yourself before pulling the rug out from under you once again.
I really like those sequences where the demons are like smashing people's teeth out. You get these like really up close shots with those cuts to silence, like you said, of like their mouths, and then we like see the demons, and then it like cuts again, and like the teeth are all broken and their mouths are bloody and they're screaming, and like that juxtaposition is really nice. And man, let's talk about that effect where the one dude gets flayed. That is like, I could not believe how gory that was for a film made in 1960.
Where they use the head under the stage, like alien effect, where like they pull his body back, and they do it with like
or like they did with Ken Foree and From Beyond.
Shiro's father. Specifically,
yeah,
I think in that, and his mistress as well. They both get flayed when they pull her back, like, and her head is like, you know, like lying there decapitated, screaming. Like it looks so good, and how they cut back to them. There's another like jump cut of them normal again, and then they scream again. And we see that several times where a character gets tortured and then like suddenly they're whole again.
Yeah.
And like they all respond differently. I love how I think it's the newspaper writer like stops for
I
a
forgot
second
about him.
and like just sort of breathe, like exhales and then starts screaming again. Like it's so cool. Like you get that wonderful pause with him, and all intercut with like these like just weird vortexes of fire and like skies of sulfur and rivers of filth and all kinds of just gorgeous
and pools of
horrifying imagery.
blood and rows of skeletons and people just wandering through hell, hollering and screaming, and all that shit is fucking rad.
I loved the scene of the war criminal father character, who it's revealed that went to hell because he stole
The last sip of water.
the last sip of water from a guy's canteen in the war, and so he's doomed to be thirsty and crawling towards this sort of small oasis in the middle of the
that dries up when he gets close to it,
which is really incredible. And the shot, it's overhead of him crawling towards this, and you get all these other people come into view also crawling towards it, and it's one of the several shots in the second half where it's so impressionistic and surreal that it really adds to the characters in an interesting way and informs the backstory of the characters in unique ways.
I almost feel like you get more characterization from the characters like when they're in hell than when they're introduced, which, is, like you said, it does provide some nice context for the first half of the film, but like I wish there was some of that in the first half of the film that would like engross me a little bit more, because I like while I was watching it, I was like, this isn't doing much for me.
Well, that's one of those things too. I feel like going back and watching it again, you might glean more out of that stuff.
Agree.
But the thing is, as a movie, watching it through the first time, that stuff really isn't very rewarding at the moment, until you get to the second half, and the second half is rewarding in itself, but also gives context to the first half, which I feel like is good, but the fact stands that like that stuff stands on its own is great as well. So
it's true. Like there's like this film really comes into itself, I think, in the second half, which is why I wish it got there sooner, because like I was not bored once they got to hell, because like there's too much cool stuff to look at. I was reading that apparently this was the last film that this studio produced. They were actually in the process of going out of business while they were filming it. So they had like massive late production budget cuts, to the extent that like a lot of the shots in the second half where like you have limbs coming up out of the ground and like people's heads and stuff, like the actors who were in that scene, in those scenes, had to dig their own holes because there wasn't budget for like set production people to do that for them, so they had to like dig their own holes before they shot those. And I think there's something kind of delightfully macabre about
digging their own graves.
Kind of digging their own hell holes.
Jeez, that's crazy. Well, amazing that like that was the result of budget cuts.
I mean, those kinds of effects probably would have been the same results, but that they had to use the actors as labor instead. But, like the actors were still willing to do that and like were committed enough to this director's vision that they were like, yeah, I'll dig my own grave. Why not?
Amazing. I have a question for you guys.
Okay.
How did y'all feel about the weird pseudo incest situation with
badly is how I feel about it.
hellish even.
Yeah,
hellish, but
with
like
Yukiko and
Sachiko.
and Sachiko, yeah.
Yeah, it added a little bit of interesting dynamic to like Sachiko's father, who was underdeveloped before that, and even like Shiro's parents a little bit. But we find out that like Shiro is actually Sachiko's brother, because Sachiko's father was having the affair with Shiro's mother, so he impregnated her, and so Shiro is actually his son as well. And okay, that's interesting, but that reveal comes like right when he's about to like make out with Sachiko in hell, after he's left Yukiko to die again in hell on like the banks of the river. And then it's like, no, wait, don't kiss her, she's actually your sister. But so then there's like this weird thing where like his fiance and his sister are identical,
and that's never explained. That is never once explained.
Nope.
Like, why does his fiance look like his sister? Would love to know.
Right, like the idea of like there being this strange doppelganger of his fiance after she's dead is cool, but then to just be like, fuck it, it's his sister actually, like that was really weird, and that did not work for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they were trying to go at was like the horror of not knowing,
I guess,
really, the difference between
surprise incest,
your own blood and your love, which is horrifying in concept, but in practice it did not work very well.
I agree.
I want to talk a little bit about how I feel like this movie really influenced both the future of Japanese cinema and the future of a lot of world cinema.
Sure.
I feel like this movie had a big impact. I don't know if it actually did, but it feels like it did on giallo in terms of use of color,
absolutely,
and use of expressive abstract imagery.
I would be very surprised if Argento and like Fulci had not seen this film when they were active.
Yeah, it feels like very much in the same vein as well. You see fingerprints of this movie on movies like Hausu, for example, and how weird and over the top they get, and the camp stays throughout both of them. We should dig in a little more in terms of the camp. Were you guys ever bothered by any of the overacting?
I loved it every time.
No, I found myself craving it, actually. Like, specifically Tamura, like, I wanted more of him. He was so ridiculous and cartoonishly sinister, and just how he keeps, like y'all mentioned, he keeps appearing just out of the blue always. Like we never see him enter anywhere. He's always just there. No, I loved that. Like I think the camp is some of the best stuff in this movie. I think the more toned down stuff, which is like a lot of the first half, is the more boring stuff.
I absolutely agree. And I think it works because how big the second half and the colors and the set pieces and the imagery of the second half is, that the campiness works and feels in that world.
There's nothing more over the top than hell, On the subject of Tamura, I did feel a little bit cheated by the resolution of his character, because as you mentioned, Cleveland, we spent the entire film guessing that he was the devil because he's insanely sinister, constantly appearing places, literally responsible for like all of the death and stuff that happens around Shiro. It's like, this guy is obviously like supernatural, and Shiro even in hell accuses him of being that, and then it turns out, nah, he was just another shithead dude. He's not the devil or a demon or nothing, because we see him getting tortured at the end.
Well, I think he was a demon. I was in the impression that he was. He was reveling in it because he belonged there.
No, I mean, he for sure belongs there, but when Shiro accuses him of being a devil or the god of death, like, Tamura mocks him as like, oh yeah, I'm a devil, I'm the god of death, and then he like sort of stumbles off into the dark, like cackling maniacally, but then we see him being tortured and like calling out to Shiro for help. So I think that is like pretty definitive that he was just a shitty person who is similarly being punished for his sins. And because I mean the voice, the judge's voice or the Lord of Hell or whatever is saying to him as he's being tortured, like, you forsook your own humanity and like reveled in cruelty. So like, that seems pretty straightforward to me. I don't think he was the devil or anything, and that bums me out because I wanted him to be.
Yeah, he should have been.
He should have been.
In the first half of the movie, it's almost questionable whether he's actually human or not.
Right.
He's the character that's treated with the most camp in the first half, and the most over the top and melodramatic, to the point where he doesn't feel like he's in the same world a lot of the time as all of the other characters. And I like that. But to undercut it with him being human all along and just a villainous human, it's like, oh man,
extremely disappointing.
That's kind of a bummer.
How did y'all feel about the very end?
I was a little bummed out. I was sort of hoping that this was going to be like a Herculean, or like feel a little closer maybe to like Orpheus, like making his way out of hell. And that
with his beloved and his daughter.
Yeah, like I was thinking, or you know, one of them had to pay a cost. You know, like Orpheus looks back, etc. Like I was hoping for something there, like they would be able to escape that reality somehow.
Or you know, even that it's more like Dante in that, you know, he's seeing hell, he's observing hell, he's being guided through hell. But like that's the weird thing too, is like his guilt that we think is like a little bit ridiculous because he's not directly responsible for any of these deaths, is his guilt is validated in hell. Like at the very beginning when he first gets there, like the Lord of Hell or whatever shows him the mirror, like the vortex mirror that like shows all of the people that he quote unquote killed, none of whom he actually killed. And I think I would have been more okay with his insane level of guilt if he had sort of like been
complicit,
or
because the film like uses the word complicit, like,
or if he had been complicit, or if like he had, after, you know, he accuses Tamura of being like, you know, everything that happened is because of you. That's like kind of his moment where he takes the blame off of himself and puts it on Tamura. And if that was rewarded with, you know,
his escape from
hell or something like that,
like his realization,
then that would
is
actually
like the key.
feel justified. Yeah. But no, instead it ends with this incredibly comical shot of this massive spinning wheel with his baby on one side and him on the other side.
It looks great.
It's like visually, once again, it's a beautiful shot, but it's fucking hilarious because it's just spinning and the baby is crying and he's like reaching across the wheel for the baby, for the baby, just going Harubi,
and like
over
he's kind
and
of
over
like
again.
He's like kind of stumbling on the wheel, like he's drunk a little bit.
Well, yeah, he's like
he's fatigued, but like,
it's like
it does look like
it doesn't. And then like the movie just ends. It's like, okay, so
no, we do cut back to reality. Mom Spaghetti, and it's and we see all the corpses
right.
and the silence.
That's right.
first, and then weirdly enough, Shiro and Yukiko, Shiro and Yukiko like dead next to each other.
Or no, Sachiko.
Yeah, it's like Sachiko like dead next to each other, like
the end.
Yep.
I respect how bleak the ending is, in that, you know, there's no redemption for the character.
Or if he was guilty.
Right, yeah, I agree.
That's part of it. Well, I feel like the movie kind of puts the blame on him, putting the weight of that guilt on his shoulders. and to make himself a victim is a sin in itself, which I don't necessarily know if I agree with. I don't really
He's created
think...
his own hell. Like, there is something to be said for that.
Yeah, but I think that's way more interesting that he feels like he deserves hell when he doesn't, you know? Like, hell in this sense is supposed to be a place of judgment where your sins are weighed against your soul and, like, you are punished for your sins. But, like, we fucking see everything that happens in this movie, and, like, he's not at fault for the Yakuza guy getting run over. He's sure as shit not at fault for Yukiko and the baby dying. He's not at fault for the Yakuza guy's wife tripping and falling off of the bridge. He's not at fault for Yukiko's parents throwing themselves in front of the train. He's not responsible for any of it, but when he gets to hell, his guilt is validated and he is told that he is guilty of those things. And like that just doesn't seem
I have a counterpoint
believable
to
me.
The sin is not being responsible for it. It's him standing by and doing nothing in the face of all this atrocity happening. So when he goes to hell, his version of hell is observing everyone else's hell and not being able to do anything about it.
I can vibe with that. I think it's a bit of a reach, but it's an explanation that I like. If he wasn't like explicitly told by the Lord of Hell at the beginning of that sequence that he is responsible for the deaths of these people, then I think that reading would be more implicit. And I think that that's a fair point. I just don't think that is how the film really presents itself. And that's what I find a little bit frustrating.
It's a little abstract in that sense.
Here's a problem. None of us have a frame of reference for the Buddhist hell.
That's true.
Like, and I think that upon reading some more literature about the Eight Rings and learning more about those Eastern concepts would give us more fulfillment watching this film as well. Like, I'd be willing to bet that there is more symbolism than just like 9 o'clock being like the ninth ring, like the sort of the ring outside of hell or however you want to perceive it. I want to think that there's more to it than many of those like well-framed shots in the early sequences. If there isn't more interplay with some of the philosophy and theology behind like Eastern views of hell,
That's a very fair point.
Quite keen to learn more and to see what else is going on there, because frankly none of us have that perspective, and I'm
very
willing to bet I am very willing to bet that much of the first act of this film as well as the second act is enriched by that knowledge.
It's possible. I will invite our listeners, if you happen to be knowledgeable, versed in Buddhism and the Buddhist interpretation of hell, and if there are things that we are missing, by all means reach out to us, DM us on Twitter, and let us know. I would be very curious, because that is very possible. Our reading comes from limited knowledge of these things,
mostly Western.
I'm also trying to approach it from just a narrative and storytelling perspective, and why these things do or do not work for me from that perspective. But you're right, it is a very Western perspective. Do you guys want to rate this?
Sure.
Yes.
Cleve, you start. You pick this movie.
Yes, it's your pick.
All right, so Shiro's a little obnoxious, and the ending didn't come to fruition the way I had sort of hoped. But apart from that, for me, this film is pretty damn near ideal. For me, in particular, I just cannot stop gushing about the visuals. It is one of the more gorgeous films I've seen, and the themes as well, like are everything I love and adore. Any sort of venture through hell is always keen on my radar. There is so much that this film dares to do, and there's so much that it does right. I'm going to give it a 4.5. I want to give it a 5. I really do, but if Shiro had been just a little smarter of a character, if it had just been a little bit easier to like Shiro, the film could have revolved around him better. But god damn, it's such a gorgeous movie. It's so fucking pretty. Visuals are a 5, but it's overall it's a 4.5.
Ben, what about you?
Well, I think you make a lot of really good points there, Cleve. I think The problems I have with the pacing of the first half of the film are really outshined by the incredible audaciousness and expressiveness and really bright colors of the second act and the hell sequence. I think it's really incredible for its time. It's really ahead of its time. It's surprisingly brutal for a movie from 1960. My jaw was on the floor through most of it, honestly. I thought it was incredible. And while some of the narrative bits felt a little underwhelming, I think that didn't matter as much to me by the end of the movie, because I think it more than makes up for it in style and presentation, and even in the first half sequences, like the bridge sequences and how they're shot and the creativity of the filmmaking in that respect. It more than makes up for it. I'm going to give it a strong 4. I would definitely recommend checking it out.
Man, well, I really wish that I liked this film more. I think that you're right, Cleveland. Like, if we were rating it solely from like a visual and stylistic perspective, it is near perfect. Just like the way it's shot is beautiful, and the production design and lighting are incredible, and like even in the first half, and then just like
And considering when it was made,
become like my wet dream in the second half. Yeah, it's remarkably ahead of its time. I was very surprised continually in this film that it came out in 1960, because especially when you compare it to a lot of the other horror movies that were coming out around this time, like you're looking at stuff like Psycho, which like Psycho was ahead of its time, but compared to this, you know, is in many ways remarkably tame.
Or even Peeping Tom came out the same year,
yeah.
which, you know, was so controversial in Britain that, you know, Michael Powell got banned from making movies for a while. And if you compare the two,
yeah, once again, fairly tame in comparison to Jigoku. Man, unfortunately, though, I was just so bored and uninterested for like the first close to hour of this movie, and I was enraptured by the second half, but going to watch it again, I would know that I would just have to sit through that first half that just did not hook me on any kind of meaningful level. Overall, still positive, but I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5, because I just wish we got to hell sooner and were there longer. Even so, that will give Jigoku an average of 3.8 out of 5 pods. We should mention that this film is in the Criterion Collection, although sadly has not been restored yet, like many Criterion films have.
But when it does,
I'm sure they will get around to it at some point. And
they've been pretty continually upgrading all their, you know, DVDs to Blu-rays.
As much as I didn't enjoy the first half of this movie, I would probably watch it again once it gets a Blu-ray Criterion edition.
Sign me up. I'd be right there.
I would love to watch the commentary on this movie as well.
Yeah, that I would be curious about that as well. That might make it a little bit more interesting for me to sit through. Another thing I didn't mention, but I did make a note of, is there's lots of theremin music in Hell, which I thought was very fun. Next week, we're going to be doing another guest episode. Katie from Lamley Optic, who has joined us for The Shining and The Lodge in the past, will be joining us for a film of her choice, the I believe most recent Lars von Trier film, The House That Jack Built, which I have not seen but have heard a lot about. And if I know Lars von Trier, we will surely all be miserable by the end of the movie.
We're going to have a great bad time.
It is going to... If it's anything like other Lars von Trier movies, it'll be the best misery I've ever experienced. And I think this will be our first Lars von Trier on the podcast, too. So I'm really excited to hear some of Katie's insights on that movie and hear why she chose it, because she is much smarter than we are. And Lars von Trier is a very very, very heady director. So that should be fun. So tune back with us next week to hear that. Before we sign off for the evening, Cleveland, what does the sponsor shelf have for us on this fine evening?
Oh, fuck. Yeah, the sponsor shelf. Upon the sponsor shelf, as I gaze with my tiny nostrils, I can see the many smells and flavors that have greeted us today, all beyond comprehension and knowing, but I will try to turn these strange and fearful sponsors into a language that you may understand. And that language is thus. Forsooth, child. There is a place in Nevada that grows the finest corn. And just to a town to the right of that is just the prettiest pasture you've ever seen. And upon that pasture sit some cattle. And those cattle, they eat from the corn. And that corn, oh boy, does it give you the finest ranch dressing that you would ever imagine. The finest ranch dressing that you could ever imagine. And this ranch dressing is Barkles, Bobbles, and Beets. Straight off the cow's teats. Barkles, Bottles, and Beets. Straight off the cow's teats. You can't believe it till you've tried it with your own eyes. It's ranch dressing for the whole dimension.
For those times when you've wanted to suck your ranch straight out of a cow's nipple.
It's the only way.
Borples, bobbles, and beeps.
Thank you. And have a wonderful evening.
All right, that'll bring us to the end of this week's episode. If you like the show, do the ding dang thing and go over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating and a nice review. We would very much appreciate that. You can also follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod and check out our Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/PodPeoplePod, where you'll see a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those episodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Deep State Ozzy.
I'm on Twitter at Mr. Sheets.
And I'm occasionally tweeting for Light Arc Studio as we further our progress on It Stares Back in early access on Steam. Go check it out. It's spooky strategy, and it's all for you.
It's hard to strategize when you're scared.
I know. That's what makes it so much fun. For real, though, we've put our hearts and souls and lots of time into the visuals, the design, the story, the music, the mechanics, the gameplay. It's great. And we're quite proud of it. You can also see some more of my own spooky visuals and sometimes not so spooky. Not everything I paint is scary. On ArtStation, just search Cleveland Mosier and I'll pop right up. Yeah, and feel free, peruse, or shoot me a message if you're looking for a commission. I'm always happy to do some doodles for some
Noodles.
That's right.
Because we know you spend your money on ramen exclusively.
It's not. You're not wholly wrong. You're more right than wrong. Most of my funds do go to noodles. You know, maybe that will change one day.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. Tune back in with us next week. And until then, I'm going to strap myself onto that wheel and go for a spin. Harumi!